Okay, hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out to Cinema Cafe. My name is John Nine. I'm one of the senior programmers here at the festival. I put together these panel discussions as well, and I encourage you to take a look through the online film guide, apps, other places. We've got some cool conversations happening across the week. Sort of the idea with Cinema Cafe is for you guys to hear a little bit more about the backstory of film, the approach that actors and filmmakers have to the work they do and the work in the festival, their careers, etc. I was, excited that this one came together as it did. I think two of the more interesting films in the festival. You have everybody's bio in front of you, so I'm not going to get into lengthy bio notes, but suffice it to say that there are some really interesting films in the festival. Two of them here. John Cho appears in a film called Columbus, directed by Kogonada, which is in our next section. It's a really beautiful, meditative, touching film that we saw a tweet this morning calling it the best film in the festival. The other best film in the festival really is. Hey, I'm telling you, these are two of the really great films in the festival. The most sold movie in the festival, and the one that you will all see. Big Sick, Kumail Nanjiani, who both appears in the film and wrote it with his wife, Emily Gordon. It's a really touching film as well, also very funny. I think that there are some themes involved in both films that we'll get into. And I want to lastly introduce our moderator, Mandali Del Barco, who those of you who live in LA probably hear her voice on NPR all the time. She is the arts correspondent. She's covered everything in NPR over the years, and we kind of threw her into the fire last minute here as we put this program together. But I thank you for taking it on, and I thank you all for coming, and enjoy.
Well, thank you all for. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you for coming in the snow like this. It was crazy. I don't know about you, but. And thank you, both of you, for being on stage here. I know probably if you're here, you know their work, but I'm gonna let you have a chance to talk to them too, to ask them questions as well. But I wanted to start out with the films that you have here at Sundance, The Big Sick and Columbus. In those, there's something similar in the two, in that you have characters that are in the hospital in a coma.
Wait, your movie's also a coma movie?
It's a coma movie.
That's what you need to be best movie in the festival. If you don't have a coma in your movie, you're wasting everyone's time.
It's a new section on Netflix, coma movies. You might enjoy.
But I mean,
I made Kumail laugh.
Yeah, that's good. So, in both of those, your characters are interacting with these people that are not, that are in the state of being. And I know this is a semi-autobiographical film for you. Can you talk about that process of writing this? Is a very personal story with you and your wife.
Yeah, it took us a long time to. We wrote the script for 3 years, and the events happened. It's people who don't know. It's me and my wife, and back when. Before we were married, she got really sick and she was in a coma for 8 days. And it's a comedy, so a lot of setups, not many punchlines. But her timing was awful during that period. But it's that weird window that it's soon after it happened and we were okay. It was like sort of shell shock for a little while, and thinking about those events was petrifying, and it just felt very, very big. It felt like just thinking about it was suffocating. And then about 5 years later, we sort of both, I in my mind knew at some point the only way that I could take the power of this event away would be if I wrote it in a story and was able to process it. So about 5 years after that, I felt like enough time had passed that I could think about that and not just start sweating, but still be able to conjure those feelings. So about 5 years after that, Emily and I decided, like, hey, let's sort of try and deal with some of these feelings in a script, and we had Judd Apatow to help us through, and so it took us about 3 years to write that, and it was interesting to change enough stuff about it to make it a story and not just our story, and that helped us judge the story on its own.
And it's very funny.
Thank you.
And you guys are already had this record $12 million deal with Amazon.
I think it's so strange. People come, Sundance is about the movies and the art and all of that, but then everybody, the number it becomes such a part of the story, and I didn't expect that, but I just want people to see the movie, and I'm glad that it looks like we'll get a chance to have that.
But how are you feeling about having your story up there? For people, it's a very personal story.
It's been strange. Right before, I was sitting next to Emily Friday, right before we had our premiere, and Emily turned to me and was like, hey, now it's not going to be just our story. It's not just going to belong to us. And I was like, oh my God, that's right. And nobody had seen it. And then in 3 days, like 3,500 people have seen it. And you lose a little something, I mean, what you gain is huge, but you do lose a little bit of that it's not just our story anymore.
Well, let me ask you, John, too, about in your film, can you talk a little bit about your character and the film itself? It's set in Indiana. You're the son of a well-known architect and intellectual but can you talk about...
He's in, the movie begins with my father, who's in town in Columbus, Indiana, which is this very small town in the middle of these cornfields. You go in Indiana, you drive past the cornfields, and then there's some Walmarts and Arby's and stuff, and then you cross a bridge, and you're in this little town that has one mid-century masterpiece after another, and it's very it's startling and strange, and it's largely due to an industrialist named Joseph Cummins. Joseph Miller. The Miller family thought that it had a lot of pride in their town, and thought that why shouldn't we have internationally renowned architects design our schools and libraries and churches? And so there is this sort of promise of America's future, that's very physical there. And in any case, my father, that's about the town. And then my father is in town, collapses, has a stroke, and is in a coma. And my character comes to do his filial piety by coming and taking care of him. But they have an estranged relationship, and he meets a young woman who is going through her own situation with her mother, played by Haley Lou Richardson. And
So what attracted you to that role? It's very different from some of the other roles that you've had in the past.
For me, it was when I read the script. My first reaction was it seemed impossible because it needed essentially an auteur to direct it, and then I started doing some research on this director, and I thought, well, maybe it is possible because I really responded to his work. And I forgot what the question was.
What attracted you to the role?
Okay, yeah, what attracted me to. Thank you.
Thank you. You can take over now.
I guess it was unselfconsciously artistic. It was just trying. It wasn't trying to fulfill any niche in a market. It wasn't clearly wasn't trying to make money. It wasn't. It seemed unfettered by genre, and it was trying. It reached so high. It was trying to. It was trying to be poetry, really, and I'd never been asked to be a part of anything like that before. So.
Yeah, I mean, because for both of you, your careers have been so amazing and so varied. I mean, you're a musician, John, right, as well. and you do.
Are you?
I didn't say magician, did I? No, musician. Weird. And you've done voices on cartoons, and you have a podcast.
That's great. He's a musician, and you've You voiced rats and stuff,
Well,
which is accurate.
well, well, for example, John, how does your music come into play in your acting?
It doesn't, but I consider both like I'm not, but I consider it all like puzzle solving. You know, I don't know if that's the way you think about acting, but it's like just all little problems that you're trying to solve. And I'm not a great actor, meaning I don't have a lot of tools, and I just open up the script, and I just see what I lack and try to work on those things. And it's the same thing, I guess, with songs and stuff.
Well, you know, I did want to ask, the three of us were all three born in another country.
Where were you born?
I was born in Peru. You were born in Pakistan. You were born in South Korea. We started having this conversation back in the back of being asked to represent, you know, some other, you know, culture, or be the representative of the entire, you know, groups of people, and also trying to work against those stereotypes. How much of that have you consciously had to do, or do you think that it's like kind of a burden in some ways?
Well, I want to say one thing first. When I first started doing stand-up comedy, people were racist to me, and they would call me Harold and Kumar, so I'm sure this is very confusing for them. They're like, what? We were trying to be racist, but were we accurate? I think trying to represent a group of people is putting a lot of pressure on yourself, and I think it also is pretty self-involved if you think you can do that. I think the best you can do is just represent yourself and, you know, do this kinds of things that you like, and you know, hope that one of the byproducts of that is that people see who your race or whatever group you belong to in a slightly different light. I would hope that would be a byproduct, but I think for me, I don't go like, it is now time to change Americans' perception of Muslims. It's gonna be a long day, you know? I don't ever think of it like that. I think you just try and be unique and try and be yourself, and if something good comes of that, great.
Yeah, I think also you get into this representation is so tricky, and I appreciate the impulse too. Like, I mean, there's something they're saying. You get the kids on the street, represent, and they mean I like you, I appreciate you, I feel a kinship with you. But I guess the danger is to take that literally as a command, as a directive. Represent me, and it gets dangerous. And one of the traps I feel like is you start to react to stereotypes, and you want to give the anti-stereotype, and by doing so, you're enslaved by the stereotype. Just as much enslaved as if you were playing the stereotype in a way, you know? And so the trick, I think, is to operate completely out of that system, you know? And The Big Sick is like a really great example of that, in my opinion. It's very honest, and it doesn't make any... it's not waving a flag in any way. It is a story, it's a personal story, and the cultural issues are totally connected to the story. And so I just feel like it's a great triumph in that way.
Oh, thank you. That's very nice of you.
It's
to
an
say.
absolute triumph, really.
We really did. I mean, you know, and we do sort of talk about religion and stuff a little bit, and the idea of having cultural expectations from your parents who are from a different culture versus expectations you have of yourself being in America and how you define yourself and all that stuff. But it's in the movie not because we wanted to make a statement on it. We just wanted to capture that year in our lives. And you know, my own identity, who I am, is something I still struggle with and think about a lot, and I don't really know to solve it, and I think it's only going to get trickier if we ever have kids and stuff. But I was really shying away from the religious aspect of the movie because part of the film is that my parents are very religious, and the character I'm playing, who is I'm basically playing myself, is a little unsure about some of that, and so I didn't want to talk about religion. And Judd was like, "Hey, there's this big thing that you're not talking about," and I said, "I don't know what to say about it." And he said, "Just say that. Just say that you don't know what to say about it." And and that's what we put in the movie. So, but it wasn't like the impetus wasn't to talk about religion. The impetus was to just get at the things that this character was struggling with.
This is an interesting thing that I've seen in pop culture. Is if you see an Asian character and they're going against the wishes of their family, in that narrative, they're almost always have to become heroic by their journey. Their hero's journey is always to leave their family behind. They have to shut the door on their family. And that's one of the accomplishments of your movie, I felt, was that it was accomplished via your character gained independence, and yet did not break those ties with the family. And it was muddy and it was messy, and yet the family was not broken. Sorry to give away stuff, but I thought that was a real cultural map that you set forth, in terms of screenwriting for Asian storytelling.
Oh, thank you. It is based on our real life, and so when we went through these issues with my parents, I guess for me, I hadn't given my parents enough credit. I knew that this would be very, very difficult for them, but I didn't understand their capacity to overcome it. To overcome the stuff about it that they disapproved of or didn't like. And there's a scene in the movie where we had written it, and for the longest time, there's a scene where I sort of take a stand against my parents, and I tell them everything, and I say that I'm in love with this woman, and I don't know about religion and all this stuff, and I take this big stand, and it was always written as this, like you say, like this sort of heroic moment. And then that week, while we were shooting, the actor, Anupam Kher, who's a Bollywood legend and an amazing actor, he was like, I feel like I would like to say something at the end of the scene. And so we were like, what would you like to say? He's like, well, I would just like my character to state my point of view. So him and Emily spoke, and Emily wrote a little thing that so I have this big, heroic speech, and usually that's, people will be like, all right, he stood up for himself. But then we put in my dad responding to me and saying his point of view and how I'm wrong. And I think that really, really, really helped the movie, just to see everybody's point of view and see, it can be very easy to see Asian parents as the old guard in the old world and outdated values, but I think it's very important to show that it's not like that.
And also to value romantic love above and beyond any other kind of love that you have in your life.
And familial bonds, yeah.
Right.
So, what's the reaction from your parents to this film?
They haven't seen it yet. They're thrilled. They've been texting me a lot. I showed it to my brother, and he really loved it. And he said there's only one little part that I think they'll probably be a little upset about. It's a very small little thing, but I think they'll like the movie. I hope they will, and I hope it'll make them understand some stuff a little bit more, because we really do try and service all the different perspectives.
And I don't know if I should give this spoiler alert, but there is a 9/11 joke in this film. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh. So one thing that I, as a comedian, struggled with when I was first starting was, I think you were speaking about this a little bit, there are expectations that people put on you to talk about certain kinds of things. So if I'm a stand-up and I'm Pakistani and I'm on stage, people kind of want you to make jokes about stereotypes or whatever it is. And so that joke, there's a 9/11 joke I make in the movie that's very inappropriate, and it's inappropriate for the character to say it, and he regrets it immediately, and it's an awful moment for him. And I think that comes from that sort of instinct of, all right, I'll talk about the thing you want to talk about, but also fuck you. Like, I will comment on the thing that you want me to comment on, but in a way that will really, really not make you happy. And so I think that's what that was, is because I felt that struggle a lot in the beginning, where it's like, I know they want me to talk about this stuff, I really don't want to, so how can I do it in a way that like jolts them?
And John, I understand that earlier this year you had some sort of campaign where you photoshopped yourself into a lot of different movie posters.
I don't think he did it himself.
I did not do that myself.
Well, what do you think about?
Hold on. You know what? I did it myself.
Well, tell me about that a little bit.
Okay. What I did was, there's a dude in New York. His name is Will Yu, I found out. And he just thought that it would be a good idea for people to see an Asian face on a movie poster, and thought that might shift people's expectation. It really shocked me, because I thought it would be hilarious, but then it after a minute it wasn't that hilarious, and it seemed plausible, and I thought it was very interesting, because he used like the tools of the business, because you have the American film market or something, and there's somebody's pitching a Nick Cage movie, Snow Walker, and they'll just have a poster. The script isn't written yet, and the poster is very important to selling the movie. And I thought it was an interesting way to sell this political idea, essentially, to the public, via this industry advertisement.
Yeah, and I do want to say, I know that you...
It's called Starring John Cho. That was the movement. Sorry.
Sorry, John Cho. And I do want to say, I know that that this is not one of the things that that motivates you as an actor, but you being an Asian romantic lead I think it does change people's perception of how they see whatever group you choose to
People
represent.
one of People Magazine's sexiest man.
It's pretty scientific. It's all good science.
But like I told you this when we were hanging out a couple of days ago, and I know it's brought up a lot, but for me, watching Harold and Kumar was really, it was very inspiring to see these two Asian dudes playing parts that I had never seen before. I had not seen them playing parts where their ethnicity wasn't really their defining characteristic.
Thanks, man.
You being the sexiest man in the world. Is there anything else?
Well, I mean, like the whole. It is like I was saying earlier, that I want to be outside of stereotypes, and yet it's just really hard to not think about it as well.
Right, and I think your instinct is so correct in that you think outside of stereotypes, and it's other people, how they perceive what you do. It's sort of on the audience to make whatever connections they want to make. I think that
there's a moment in Columbus that I was recalling the other night, and in my career, I've been asked a few times to, if my character is an immigrant, or if my character's father is an immigrant, to if I'm talking about my father, to do his voice, in the scene. And who knows if that's right or not? I might do that in life. I might do that with my friends. But it's an uncomfortable thing to be asked, frankly, by a white man to do that. And especially if it's in the context of a comedy. And I find that to be very dangerous, and it makes my spidey sense tingle a little bit, and I've always resisted that, and I don't believe I've ever done that. But I did it in Columbus, and I wasn't asked. And I did it during the scene, and I didn't know I was going to do it. And it was a very loving recollection of my father that came up. And it was, I went back to this thing that I thought I'd avoided because it was a part, because for me, the role existed outside of that system.
Yeah, when I first started auditioning, I was asked to do accents a lot, and the parts that I would audition for were like, cab drivers and things like that. And I decided that I wasn't going to do the accent like that. I made that a hard rule. And if they would ask me in the audition, like, I also love the code words they use, like, hey, could you do it? That's funny, but could you do it like even more? And then they wouldn't finish the sentence. And then I would tell them, no, I'm not going to put on an accent. And I decided that if it was awkward for them, it was awkward for them, and I wasn't going to do the work to make them feel better about making this request, especially in comedies, because I do think people think, Pakistani Indian accents. First of all, they want me to sound like Hank Azaria. That's what they think, because he voiced Apu. They want me to sound like Apu. They want me to sound like a brown guy pretending to be a white guy pretending to be a brown guy, So I decided I wouldn't do it. But then I think now it is a little case by case. You look, and there are certain parts that would require an accent, and it wouldn't be, would be for the right reasons. So I think it's a little more nuanced than I thought it was.
That's another thing, like that I've been thinking about lately is, because I'm guilty of, I felt like I chased roles that were absent of cultural history, and it's another thing that was so refreshing about The Big Sick was to see, just as an Asian American, to see, well, that is family stuff that we typically don't talk about, and you're just shining this beautiful light on it. And but I got sad because if you look at my IMDb page, I have an IMDb page. I'm bragging, but I bet that most of the character names on the right-hand side did not have Asian surnames, which at a certain point in my career was a point of pride. And then it morphed into a bit of sadness. I was like, well, but why isn't that history being... Well, first, I guess the question is, why wasn't it written as an Asian person? Why is that so odd? And then, if your character doesn't have an Asian surname, it's probable that you're not talking about your family and they're not making an entrance in the show or the movie. And so these characters become these little emotional islands. They're psychological islands. So, like, how did this person come here? Did this person have a mother and a father? I mean, like, where was this person born? What is this person's history? So it felt very strange. And it kind of works sometimes, I guess, in sci-fi or something, that they're like discrete people. They only exist
Like
in
Sulu.
film. Right. Hey, yeah, I was in that.
Oh, yeah. Hey.
But
You were Sulu.
yeah. But you know what I mean? I'm very conflicted about that.
That's so interesting because I've had that exact same issue. Like when it started out, when I would get a part that was like an American name or not like an Indian Pakistani name, it was like a point of pride where I was like, oh, I got this part. I'm Roger, because I was the best guy who auditioned for it, I am Roger. Yeah, look me in the face and tell me I don't look like a Roger, And it was a point of pride. And then it's now gotten to the point where when I look, I feel like we're ignoring something. And I think it must be part of the evolution of how people see where we're from, because at some point it's ignoring. First of all, I think when Asian people or Pakistani Indian people start being in pop culture, they're defined by their ethnicity. And then it seems like the open-minded thing to do is to ignore the ethnicity, which is what we're talking about with the names thing. And then I think the next step, which we're hopefully going through right now, is to talk about the ethnicity in a way that's open-minded and inclusive, and you're not like ignoring it. You're actually, but you're not defined by it either.
Normalizing it or somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a second step to that too, which is that if the character I was playing had a romantic relationship with someone who wasn't Asian, particularly white, people got very excited, particularly Asian guys, and it was a lot of attaboys and that sort of thing. But later on, then I started to think that it was like, oh, I don't think they want two Asian people on the screen at once, or the screen might set on fire. And then I thought, if I have the chance to raise my hand and vote, I'd like to see two Asian people in love on screen in American pop culture, because I feel like that's extremely rare. I really struggle to see because they're almost always mixing and matching with Asians, and I'm not entirely sure why, but I have my theories. But it's super rare, and at some point I started thinking, well, why? And then I went back to, is it the old narrative that in order to, love is the antithesis of culture, our own culture, and that to buy that an Asian character falls in love, he or she must break from their family, and that it doesn't compute for us to see two Asians in love because they look like one another.
Yeah, that's why we in our movie we have my brother married to a Pakistani woman in a very happy relationship.
Yeah.
To show like, hey, for them this is like, and my parents also have a really good
Not
relationship.
just content,
right, no, like a
but
loving,
happy,
yes,
and loving.
a loving, satisfying relationship. Does that answer your question?
It does. And in fact, I wanted to open up questions to people here in the audience, too. I'm sure you have a lot of things to ask. I think we have microphones somewhere. Is that right? Back there? Did anybody have any questions? Yeah. How about her first and then you?
Yes.
Yes, my question's for John. I'm originally from Indiana, so I can ask this. Before you went to Columbus, did you have stereotypes about people in Indiana like, oh my God, I'm going to go film this movie where everyone's watching NASCAR and drinking light beer, and this is going to be like a really scary place? And were you surprised when you got to Columbus that there's culture and different and art?
I suppose it'd be a more entertaining answer if I told you that I was expecting wrestlers in the streets. He's laughing because there were actually wrestlers in the streets.
What do you mean wrestlers in the streets?
Like in downtown Columbus, they set up a wrestling rink,
Oh wow,
and guys put on Speedos
actual
and masks.
wrestlers in the streets.
Wrestlers in the streets. But anyway, my experience has been, and I've filmed in a lot of places, that people are people, man. And I've never go into a place with preconceived notions of who I'm gonna see. I just don't. Yeah.
There was a question over here.
This question is for John, too. But Camille, you can answer it, too. I just know you've heard it before. But what is something you know about acting now that you wish you had known when you began your career?
I guess in a business sense, it seems obvious, but there's really one place to do it, and when you're a young person, you don't think these are the people I'm going to be seeing for the rest of my life, but that's the truth, and I guess it's a good thing to keep in mind as you're working with people and you're creating with people. I don't know. It just is be nice, I guess. I wish I would have known that when I was younger. Yeah.
You want to answer that too?
I think the be nice and be on time every day. That's the most important thing, because a lot of times you see actors, you're like, that person is so talented. Why aren't they in more stuff? And you always hear it's because they're very difficult to work with. And then there are people that I'm like, this guy's not that good, but he's in everything, and it's because they're like wonderful to be around. That's how I get jobs.
Roger.
Hi. So I love both of your work. I have to say, Kumail, I know all of your stuff. I listen to all of your comedy. I can I do your routines. And one of the things that you said, you can't wait till you've made it big enough where people are like, oh, you're Kumail Nanjiani. You really are there. Do you feel like you're there yet, or you're almost there?
I used to do this joke where basically it was when I was called Kumar on the street, and I said I want to be so famous that I'm the brown stereotype that they would use to try and be racist to me, and then realize, oh, that actually is Kumail Nanjiani. I said I wanted to be that famous. You know what? I think it's such a complicated. It's changed recently again, but until very recently, I really was very hopeful about people's acceptance of brown people, and I felt like we were getting away from some of the really bad stereotypes that we had been saddled with, and I feel like that optimism is a little in check these days, because I feel like some of that, Islamophobia has come roaring back. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to tell you, you are.
Thank you.
Because you're the reason why I'm here. I love your work.
It is like an interesting thing too. After the election, I had a lot of feelings about it, but one of them, which is weird, was an existential crisis about my career, which was like, I thought that if I was honest and did good work, I could reach anyone, that was willing. And I really did spend some time thinking, is this the end? Is this the beginning of the end? Can I, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It got that bad, and I was wondering if you had career existential dilemma as well.
No, I didn't, because it's a tough time to talk about this for me, because it's everybody's head spinning, and for me, talking to my mom especially has been it's been very difficult, because my mom, she's been in America for about 10 years, and she's from Pakistan, and then when she moved here, she was like, to her, it was this like really loving, accepting place, and she was she was all like rosy-eyed, and she loved it here, and then all this stuff happened, and she feels real physical danger, and she feels sort of not wanted, and she's like, we already came to America, where are we going to go next? So for me, that's been the main thing that I've been thinking a lot about is, my uncle lives in Florida and has been there for 25 years, and he says for the first time in his life, his neighbors are looking at him differently, even though he knows these people, so it's a bad time.
Well, and I just think that it's going to be a very interesting time for artists of all kinds as a response to whatever's going on.
I said this before, but I would much rather live in a happy world where our art didn't have to be good, I think that would be so much better if we had an environment where good art wasn't necessary. What a joy that would be.
We have another question here.
Hey, this is a question for Kumail, but however, John, you can answer this too, I guess. But I guess specifically, as I'm also a person of color in the LA stand-up community, and I've seen like a bunch of your shows there, and like obviously a huge fan. Why I'm here, and I guess I'm wondering if like as a person of color in that specific way, like where you're seeing shows that are getting called diverse just by having like a couple of Caucasian women on the lineup, which is positive, but not necessarily of like a full diverse like spectrum. Are there any specific like communities of comedy out there that you would recommend as being like, I don't know, like inclusive and like rad to people, you know, like of all kinds trying to get out there and like make effort to actually have diverse bills on their stuff?
Yeah, I hosted a show. My wife Emily's back there. She woke up. Spoiler alert. This is about our movie. She's funny again. We booked a show called The Meltdown, and we just stopped doing it a few months ago. And I know she tried really, really, really hard to have diverse points of view on the show. The tough thing about comedy has been that it has been such a boys' club that it's that there are more and more women starting to do comedy, and there's obviously many, many funny women, but if you go to open mics, or at least when I went to open mics in Chicago 10 years ago, it was, I think, an awful scene to be a woman because the guys were very aggressive and the jokes were very, I think, very misogynistic and sexist. And I think because of that, still, I hope that's changing, but we're still don't see as many women doing comedy as I think we should be seeing right now. So there is that challenge too, where they're just, and because of me being Pakistani, there aren't a lot because of cultural pressures. I think it's changing a little bit again, but there are a lot of, like, I run into people who are doctors and stuff that were like, I wanted to be a comedian, but I became a doctor instead, and I'm like, that sucks for you. Yeah, I think I think it's a challenge, but I hope times are changing. And I honestly, unfortunately, have not been as in touch with the LA live performance scene in the last couple of years because we've been making this movie. And it's been a lot of work.
Anybody else? Here in the back.
This question is for Camille. We saw your movie on Saturday night. We loved it. And you referenced there's a part that you think your parents may not approve of. I wanted to know if you would like to share what is it, why, and do you feel bad about having it in the movie?
I don't feel bad about having it in the movie because it is an actual thought that I've had since I was a little kid. And is this live streamed? What's the story here? What's that camera hook up to? It's all good. It's live streamed. I feel like you haven't been paying attention. There is a very, very minor, because there's a very minor criticism in there of, or at least my observation. There's a part in it where I mentioned very briefly that when I would go to these religious sermons, people would be crying and they would be competing to see who could cry the hardest. And that's an observation I had. And in the movie, I talk about how I could never cry, and that made me feel like I didn't belong with all these people around me. And that's a thought I had since I was a little kid. And I know I'm right, because there would be, I'm like, nobody has ever cried or like smacking their hand on their head like that, So I think there is like a performative nature to that crying. But that was the one part that my brother said. He was like, they'll probably get a little offended at that characterization.
That's so fascinating because in Columbus, the movie I did, there's also a mention of not wanting to attend. My character doesn't want to attend his father's funeral if he dies and have to grieve theatrically because it'll be expected of him. Yeah. And he says he doesn't want to participate in that. Yeah.
So you guys did make essentially the same movie.
Again, the coma genre on Netflix.
Emily, you just walked in, but his movie's about a person in a coma as well. Yeah.
There's another question up here. Is there a mic?
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for doing this panel. I really appreciate it. So I'm also a director and actress, and I'm about to graduate film school and, throw my body into the depths of LA. But I was wondering, John, I wanted to go back to what you were talking about how you never see two, I guess how like you never see two Asian people in love on a screen. And something that I've noticed recently in film is that when you have a cast that's like primarily one color, for example, like if you like, something that comes to mind is like, for example, like the Netflix show like Luke Cage, you have a primarily black cast, all of a sudden it becomes a black show, or like if you have an Asian cast, it becomes an Asian movie or whatever. And I have spoken with some of my like white friends who say that they don't really have as much of an interest in that kind of cinema because they don't feel like they'll be able to relate to it. And I personally don't think that's true, but I just was curious to hear like what do you have to say to people who feel that way?
I don't know what to say to I don't know that I've never heard that, and I actually think the opposite is more generally true. Is that people are not really bothered by casts of color, and that it's a bit of a misconception that it's a problem or it's a stumbling block, and that I think most people are willing to overlook it. If someone were to say, I don't know what I'd say to a person like that, I guess, check yourself.
Anybody else? How about?
Hi, my question is regarding the Asian American representation on screen, and I'm just wondering, like, even when there are Asian roles written for Asian characters, a lot of the time Asians aren't casted for those characters. Like, for example, Emma Stone was casted as a half Chinese woman in Aloha, or like, what's her name? Was casted for Ghost in a Shell, written for a Japanese
Scarlett
character.
Johansson.
Yeah, sorry, Scarlett Johansson. So how would, as Asian American actors, how would you tackle that problem of like non-Asians being casted as for Asian characters?
Don't look at me, dude. I think we're not in positions where we can make those decisions, So even whatever thoughts we have on how we would tackle these things are unfortunately irrelevant because we don't have the power. I do think that people's reaction to those situations you talked about were so strong that I think people are probably a little more wary of doing that because both those strong backlash to both those things, I believe. So I hope. The other thing is, how do you feel about this? Can I ask you something? How do you feel if there's a Chinese character in a movie who's played by a Japanese person? Like, does that bother you? How do you feel about that?
Well, I guess it depends on. Historically, it's meant that it has meant that you're going to get a lot of things wrong.
Right.
So, for instance, in my house growing up, we were not allowed to watch the show MASH because they were very careless. They would, hire Japanese actors and say, just speak Japanese, it's fine.
Really? That's why we weren't allowed to watch Short Circuit.
So,
it's a white dude in brown face, if anybody hasn't seen that movie.
Fisher Stevens.
Yes.
So I don't inherently have a problem with it, and it depends if he was, a Korean, then I think it should go to a Korean, because you're going to feel the difference. But so yeah. I mean,
it sort of depends on, you think, like how it affects the actual quality of what's
right. So it's the work, and there are cultural differences, and it's hard to just walk in and mimic that accurately. So it depends on the character. But I guess if you were looking for a yes or a no, I would generally err towards being culturally correct in the box. How can I hear you without a microphone, though?
So, adding on to that, do you Thanks. Because there's so few roles for Asians to play that if you're an Asian actor who's Korean and there's a role for someone who's Filipino or Chinese, you're going to jump on it because there's so few roles. Because I met a gentleman here who's Latino at the film festival who's an actor, and he says he takes a lot of roles as Italians because there's not a lot of roles for Latino men. And so because there's so few roles, there's a crossover for, you know, if you...
I'll answer. Okay, yeah, okay. In general, and I'm just gonna, and I don't know if this will answer your question exactly, but I think that's a very personal decision for the actor, and you know, I say this about whatever it is, like my idea of a stereotype might not be your idea of a stereotype, and the actor is the one who has to live with the role. It exists in perpetuity. And so that's your conscience. And so my advice for any actor is to take a role. If you're going to take a role, be willing to live with it, be joyous within it, and embrace it. If you cannot do that wholeheartedly, then you should stay away. And that may be for any number of reasons, politics being one of them.
I think we have to wrap it up, but I did want to ask what you're working on now. What can we see you next, both of you?
We're currently shooting the 4th season of Silicon Valley, and so that'll come out at the end of April.
I'm unemployed, and I'm working on a show that you may see.
Facebook. Facebook has a question. Can I read this? I don't know what it is. It says, what difficulties do you have being taken seriously given your comedic roots? Are either of you planning more dramatic projects?
I have a film called Columbus.
They're not at Sundance, obviously.
I don't think that, you know, I'd be curious to know what your answer is. People... I don't choose that much. You know, it's not like you know, I have the big board in my office at home. I'm going, okay, what am I going to take next? And you know, it's like when they call, I say yes or no.
I mean, I don't really worry about people taking me seriously or not. I love doing comedy, and I love being funny, you know, and stuff. So, and I just try and do stuff that I like, that I think would be fun to do or would be a good product. I don't really think too much about whether or not people take me seriously or not, really.
But you want them to not take you seriously some of the time.
Yeah, I think that would be great if they didn't take me seriously when I'm making, for instance, a heinous 9/11 joke.
I think that's all the time that we have, but thank you guys so much. Thank you too.